Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General with some more Total War Warhammer Legendary Lord lore, and this time we are going to be looking at the Red Tsar, otherwise known as Tsar Boris Bokker. Just a quick disclosure here, guys. A lot of this video is taken from videos I've done on the history of Kislev and on the army list of Kislev. So if you've seen both of those videos, you can feel free to skip this one, but if you haven't, sit back and enjoy. The tale of Tsar Boris begins with his birth to the Tsar Vladimir Bokker. Boris was said to be born under the Powl of the Blood Heart, which is an ancient omen from mainly the Ungol side of the Kislev people, where there was a great Norscan warrior known by the name Ekel Bloodheart, who fought actually against the Ungols and Sigmar, who fought fantastically well against them, and without allowing them to kill him, chopped off his own head. He was later buried in the cairns, but they say you can hear his howl on the wind sometimes, and it's said that the night that Boris was born, such a howl was heard. Now, this is considered to be a great omen for a baby to become a great and noble warrior. And indeed, when he was born, the hags of Kislev predicted that he would fight hard and die well. Now, further information on what exactly the hags of Kislev are, I do recommend you check out my Kislev army video, popping up in the top right hand corner now, but they're just kind of a wise woman sect within the nation. In the year 2498 of the imperial calendar, and that is when Tsar Vladimir Bokker dies fighting a huge gobbo gathering east of the city of Kislev, and his son Boris Bokker takes over as Tsar. Now, Boris becomes one of the most legendary Tsars in the history of Kislev itself. In the year 2499, so the first year of his reign basically, he rides out to meet a huge incursion of beastmen who have made their ways into the borders near the city of Prague. Now, there's a lot going on in the city which has remained really eternally cursed since the Great War against Chaos, and he marches out to meet this horde of beastmen. Now, this battle is vicious, but he shows tactical cunning and manages to slaughter this war herd and turns the snowfield on which the battle is fought completely red with the blood of the beastmen, earning himself the name Radi Bokker, or Bokker the Red, or Tsar Bokker the Red, or simply the Red Tsar, for the blood of the beastmen he spilt that day. Now, after he took power, it wasn't all battling for this Tsar Boris. He actually set about trying to rebuild the kingdom of Kislev, which hadn't really recovered since the days of the Great War. People had been selfish, its nobility and rulers had kind of hoarded the money to themselves and not really spent it on rebuilding the kingdom. Boris was going to see this change and almost emptied the entire treasury of Kislev on rebuilding infrastructure, roads, repairing walls of fortified townships, really just getting the infrastructure in place for Kislev to be a profitable and flourishing kingdom once more. And he imported black powder from the empire as a weapon to really improve the armies. He also spent a whole bunch of cash on employing mercenaries to update the training of the Kislev troops with things like gunpowder weapons and artillery to really make them an effective modern fighting force. Now, using all this money to do all these projects almost bankrupted the treasury, his own family, and the family of the many nobles who he insisted help pay for all these improvements as well. But it paid off, and trade began to improve around Kislev. More people began to move there. It became a flourishing kingdom as he had intended under his leadership. So not only a great warrior leader, but a great administrative leader as well for the kingdom of Kislev. Between the years 2499 and the years 2503, the Tsar had a daughter who was named Catherine. Now, she was a lovely and beautiful girl and his only child, I believe. Around the year 2503, he also sought to start to revive the cult of Ursun. He was the god of the Gospodars, the bear god who they prayed to, who they credited for being able to survive the harsh northern climates and teaching them how to live and flourish in such weather. The god of the bear, and this had really started to fade. With the closer ties to the empire, the god Ulrich from the empire had started to come over, and the god Tal from Talabekland had started to become a major influence in Kislev as well. Now, Boris wanted to really revive Ursun, as I said, and so began to worship the god himself, give some money to the cult of Ursun to try and improve its strength and position in Kislev society, and he himself decided to undertake becoming a priest of Ursun. So he had to go through the initiation, which was to go out into the wilderness by yourself and tame a bear. So he disappeared into the forest of Kislev, and it had been some, 18 days and no one had heard from the Tsar. At this point, people were a little bit worried. He insisted on going alone, no bodyguard or anything. It's like, our king went into the woods to look for a bear. You know what? Odds are he might just be dead. Let's send out some search parties. And people had begun to prepare the very young Katerina at that time to take over from her father and be coronated as Tsarina. However, the next day, the search party found Boris. He was crumpled and unconscious beneath the body of the biggest bear any of them had ever seen. Covered in massive, thick white fur, the bear was ferocious and huge, and the two of them were surrounded by the corpses of wolves. Now, it was thought that either the Tsar was dead, but they could see him breathing, but they couldn't get anywhere near him thanks to this bear. It took another day for the Tsar to awake, and eventually sort of managed to communicate or talk the bear down so he could approach his men and tell them the tale of what had happened. 15 days into his trek through the woods, he encountered this enormous bear, the largest bear he'd ever seen or even really heard about, and he saw this as a sign from the god Ursun himself that this was to be his bear, the bear he had to tame. And so he approached the bear and entered into conflict. Unarmed with just his fists, he battled with this mighty beast as the two exchanged blow for blow, dodging and parrying, using his bare fist to rain down strikes on the bear's muzzle and face, while the bear clawed at him with talons the size of daggers and tore through his flesh. Both the bear and the man were bloodied. The two of them battled for over a day, and as the darkness descended upon them and the scent of their blood caught the wind, where a pack of ravenous wolves emerged from the darkness, surrounding the two combatants. Initially, the wolf pack went directly for the bear, and Tsar Boris got in their way. Grabbing the first wolf out of the air, he crushed its skull with his bare hands before tossing away its lifeless corpse. Then he was striking at any wolf that dared approach as the wolves clawed and bit at him. Eventually, already wounded from the strikes of the bear, the man collapsed, and just then the bear itself swiped the wolves off of Boris's body, killing 3 of them with a single swipe in the process, and began to battle the rest of the wolf pack. The surviving wolves tucked tail and fled into the darkness yet again. The bear, turning towards the unconscious body of Boris, took a protective stance over him, and for the remaining 4 days guarded him, even from his own men. Now this was the tale of how Boris managed to befriend, if not quite tame, the mighty bear that would go on to become known as Erskine, the name meaning bear brother, as he was not his tamed beast, but his brother bear, his companion and mount, for the rest of his days as he led the armies of Kislev on the battlefields against the ever-present threat of chaos. Now, having completed his trial of the cult of Ursun, he was named as the high priest of the cult, changing his name from Boris Bokar to Boris Ursus. Now, over the years, he became a wonderful warrior, again, fantastic administrator, really bringing Kislev to the peak of its power it ever really had at any point in its history. His daughter was found to have the blessing of ice magic within her blood as well, and went on to become the preeminent ice witch within Kislev. But alas, nothing lasts forever, and in the year 2517 of the imperial calendar, Boris went to lead a small force of Kislev troops north after rumors of a Norscan raiding party heading south had reached the palace. Upon crossing into Troll country, they met a huge force of Chaos Raiders, much more than they had been prepared to face. Undaunted, Tsar Boris, on his trusty bear Erskine, led the charge into battle. Tainted Norscan warrior after warrior, they slashed down with weapon, claw, and tooth, one after the other, but after some time, the numbers just told, and Tsar Boris slowly found himself being completely surrounded. Onwards they fought, however, said to have fought that day with the fury of Urson the Bear God himself. They slew tens, if not hundreds, of enemy warriors before the Boris himself was mortally wounded, but that did not stop him. But again, wound after wound piled up as his blood dribbled down onto the pure white fur of his bear Erskine. Barely able to maintain his place in the saddle, the bear decided to turn and take Boris back into the rear ranks of his army. Boris, mortally wounded several times over, refused to give way to death until he knew that the battle had been won by the forces of Kislev. Inspired by their leader, his troops went on to do that very thing, winning the day against the Norscan forces led by an evil Norscan warlord known as Tzar. Upon his death, his longtime companion and friend Erskine, his bear, his mount, his ally, is said to have roared for an entire night before disappearing into the northern wilderness, and said to be hunting those chaos filth that killed his friend to this very day. Following Boris's death, his more than capable daughter Tsarina Catherine took over the leadership of Kislev, and in the lore of Games Workshop, she actually leads Kislev to this day. So, I hear you say, if Boris is dead, how can he be a legendary lord in Total War Warhammer? Well, Boris didn't actually die until the year 2517 of the Imperial calendar, and the start of Total War Warhammer, if we take the coronation of Karl Franz as its beginning, actually only happens in the year 2501, or the year sort of 25 flat, depending on sources. But that means that there's another 16 years of Boris being around. So having him as a character in Total War Warhammer makes complete sense in that terms. He doesn't die for another 17 years if we take Karl Franz's coronation as the start point of the game. So I think he'd make a great legendary lord when we eventually see Kislev, probably in Total War Warhammer 3. So let's move on to more of his tabletop stuff. He had a role known as Kin of the Bear God, because he rose to become the high priest of the god Urson, the bear god that the Kislevites worship above all others, particularly the Gospodar. It's basically the idea of a blessing on a single unit or a few units at an extra point cost. Now, what we'll really probably see this implemented in Total War is with some heroes, we've seen them come with a banner in their armies in the campaign, and that's probably what we'll see with Boris as well, where he can assign it to a single unit. But what it would do on the tabletop was allow any units who were given this blessing of the bear god, this kin of the bear god ability, were given a charge bonus and they were given an additional attack. Now, this was, I think, restricted to units of Cassars, but that's the way it worked on the tabletop for the rule, and it's one of the trickier ones to implement directly, but I think we'll probably see a banner called the Kin of the Bear God that you'll be able to assign to a particular unit. Now, over the years, Boris went on to acquire a couple of legendary items as well. The first of which was the Shard Blade. Now, not being able to wield the legendary blade Fearfrost, which the first Tsarina had managed to make for herself with the Mad Dwarf, he got a weapon of his own made, known as the Shard Blade. It was crafted from ice hewn from a glacier in Norska, and then with ice magic, it was made to be permanent in its state and never melt. Now, when it strikes an opponent's body, the cutting ice will embed shards of itself. They'll enter an opponent's bloodstream and start to cause them internal damage. That is the gift of his weapon, the polearm Shard Blade. Now, what this meant as far as the tabletop was concerned was that it would give him an extra strength bonus, so we'd see a weapon strength boost with this weapon. Something that's hard to translate into the game of Total War Warhammer is it would make you take a toughness test, and if you fail that test, you take additional wound. Now, there's no real way to translate that directly into Total War Warhammer. What we're more likely to see, basically, a huge weapon strength buff, probably with magical damage as well, because the way that the blade was formed out of ice and magic. We'll probably see a slowing effect, knowing that Creative Assembly does have a penchant for anything related to ice magic to have a slowing effect as well. He also got a wonderful piece of armor made for himself, known as the Armor of Ursun, forged on the spring equinox, which is a holy day in the religion of Ursun. It was made by having the molten steel mixed in with the powder of bear bones, giving it the strength of the mightiest bear, the armor itself. And what this means as far as the tabletop was concerned was it basically gave him a 50-50 armor save, and it allowed him an extra attack for each attack done to him. So that made him kind of very potent in terms of the number of attacks he could delve out on the tabletop. The way this would probably be translated in Total War Warhammer, you'd have a very high armor rating, so it'd give you a boost to that, but it would also cause the enemy perhaps damage within a certain radius of him, or it might work something like the Curse of the Mummy, as we've seen in the Tomb Kings, where maybe after he gets below a certain amount of health, it will do damage to units around him. Something along those lines, I think, is a good interpretation of it. We've seen both things done before in Total War Warhammer, so nothing out of the ordinary there. Now, as far as his bear, Erskine, it also had some very special rules. The idea of its winter coat, its muscle, its fur, its fat, would give it an armor save of 5+ on a dice, but the mount and the rider aren't separated in Total War Warhammer yet. We might see that in 3 with some of the stuff we've been seeing coming out of 3 Kingdoms, but it's not something that happens yet, so not really that relevant. They'll probably have a shared stat line there. Now, the other thing they have is Thunder of Ursun, which just means that a massive white bear causes fear, which, you know what, if a polar bear was in the middle of a battlefield and I had to fight it with a spear with a massive guy on it yielding a polearm swinging it at my head, I'd be pretty afraid as well, so there we go. And the other one is Fury, and that's really basically that on the tabletop, the bear would always pursue. Now, the way we might see this play out in Total War Warhammer is simply that we would see the bear maybe lose control like the lizard men do sometimes. That's a possibility. I'm not sure if they're going to do that, but it's a possibility of the implementation of that rule. And that's really it for Boris there, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright guys, bye.